Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today, and very warm welcome on behalf of Global Shapers and Voice. I'm Shruti, and I'm part of Global Shapers. I'm doing an introduction on behalf of my team and on behalf of Voice. We are four shapers, Amulia, Stephanie, Elena, and me, Shruti. Global Shapers is a youth network that spans across the globe. And we do projects that are usually self-started and self-driven. And these projects are based on the social needs of the local or global communities. In Ireland, we realized that there was a big gap in information regarding textile recycling. In many cases, this information was just not available or inaccessible, or as you might have all experienced, shrouded in layers and layers of diplomacy and ambiguity. We created the project Textile, and our aim is to bring forward initiatives and bring forward people like Solene and their initiatives and make information that's important, relevant, and maybe even surprising accessible to everybody. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Solene. Solene is from Voice Ireland, and she's done extensive research on post-consumer textile waste in Ireland. She's the expert in this. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to give it away to her. Everybody, welcome Solene.
Thank you. So thank you so much for having me and for you all to be here tonight. So I'm going to be presenting kind of what we've been doing at work at Voice in terms of textiles, because that's a huge field. But so we started off with kind of the waste part of it. And so we have a campaign that's called Threads of Transparency. But I guess I can start with kind of who is Voice, because I don't know if you've heard of it. So we're an environmental NGO that works around waste reduction, and we've been existing since 1998, so that's 26 years or something like that. And we mainly work around the areas of waste reduction and circular economy, all in the scope of the SDG 12. So for the ones who are not familiar, SDGs are Sustainable Development Goals, and they are set by the UN to tackle all kinds of issues around the globe, from inequalities to climate change and all of this. And the 12th one is around sustainable consumption and production. And so what we always do at Voice is kind of start from the waste, and kind of because it's always important to see what we waste, how we waste it, how much of it, to then kind of build your way up the stream and go up the waste hierarchy, which you can see here, up to prevention, which is how do you get rid of it? So you can get rid of it through design, but you can also, and most of the time the answer is reducing our consumption, producing better, and all of these things. So if we start kind of with the main things around fashion and kind of the basic numbers that a lot of people might have heard already in the fashion industry and its impact. So the fashion industry represents between 10 and 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions, making it one of the most polluting industry in the world. But it doesn't stop there, because there's also a lot of pollution around the water, microplastics, soils. There's a lot of different impacts that are within the textile industry. So in terms of water, it comes with using fresh water during the different processing, manufacturing, with heavy chemicals used all around, with dyes and finishes and all these things. And one of the latest issues that has been raised is around microplastic, because most of our clothes nowadays are made of synthetic fibers, so polyester, nylon, all of these, and they shed microplastics. And even if it's a recent topic and there is only a few studies, we are already able to say that it could be responsible to up of 35% of oceanic primary microplastic pollution. So that is very worrying. And what I like to remind everyone is always that the impact of a clothing is throughout its entire life. It's not just by making it, even though that is a huge part of it. It goes from making the fiber in itself, so growing the cotton, to making the textile in itself, to all of the economy that is around it, or the use phase, which is sometimes forgotten about, but it can represent up to 30% of the impact of a garment. So how do we do the laundry? How do you wash your clothes? Do you dry it? All of these things can contribute to making it having a bigger impact. And of course, the end of life, which we'll be exploring today. So textile waste is the end of the life cycle, and it kind of is an important one because it can be forgotten about again, because we get rid of it and then just forget about it. But the clothes still has an impact after we don't see it in our closet. So waste here those are the different types of textile waste that you can find throughout the life cycle. So the two at the bottom are post-industrial, so anything during the manufacturing, so cuts, everything. This is this type of waste, 10%. The pre-consumer one is the ones that are, it's the smallest one, but it's also the least ethical one in a way, because it's clothes that are in perfect condition, and just because the brands are running on an overproduction model, they're just destroying them, just not used. And then the biggest one is the post-consumer textile waste, which is, as I was saying, every time we discard them. So if we look specifically in Ireland, we dispose of 170,000 tons a year. So that's about 35 kilos per person, which is a huge amount, and it's also a lot more than the EU average of 12 kilograms. And if we look at where does it go and what happens to it, at the moment, 65% is just going straight to the bin, black bin, and being incinerated or landfilled. So that means that at the moment, there's no proper way of handling textiles in Ireland. And as I'll repeat multiple times, the main problem is that there's no definition of it. So textile waste is not recognized or considered at all in Ireland and in Europe either. But what's even more interesting is to see what happens to the ones that are collected, because in the near future, the EU is asking all the member states to have a separate collection of clothing. So that means that this 65% should be collected in the future. So what will happen to it? We can base ourselves on what's currently happening. So 35% collected by two streams, either charity shops through donations most of the time, or commercial collectors. So commercial collectors would be those companies that own all the textile banks that you might see, in parking lots, all of these things. And even if they kind of seem similar in most people's minds, they're very different because their purpose is very different. Charity shops' purpose is to reuse. So they might not reuse everything that they get, but their main purpose is to reuse and be part of the circular economy. Whereas the commercial collectors, who are the ones who end up handling most of the clothes, their purpose is just to collect as much as possible and export it for a profit. So they're not sorting through, they're not, even though a lot of them would call themselves recyclers, they're not recycling themselves. So they kind of use that as saying we're exporting for repurpose, for recycling, all of these things. But as for to date, we don't have a lot of transparency or traceability over where does it go, what does really happen to it. And so that's where we kind of identified the problem at Voice, and that we wanted to kind of go look a bit further. And so those are this just a summary of what I just said. But I guess the problem is that once it's exported, it kind of goes through the same process at a European level. So European wholesalers in Germany, Belgium, all of those countries, they would receive all of these clothing from all the EU countries, and they will do a kind of a sorting, but their goal again is to get the most quality, the highest quality of it, so that they can put it on the international secondhand market. So vintage shops, like those kind of shops. And so that's only 10%. So out of everything that they go through and sort through, there's 90% that can not be reused in Europe. So they will export it again and again outside of the EU usually, and going to the global south, where we're seeing an increasing amount of waste. Because as I was saying, because there's no definition of what textile waste is, there's no way of preventing the export of it within bales of other clothing. So they just label everything reusable, label everything just used clothing, where in reality you have a lot of waste in there. And that is something that is being investigated, and we have data on it, and there are organizations in the receiving countries that do tell us that it's a growing problem, and it's an urgent problem because it's putting people and their economy in jeopardy. So the OR Foundation is telling us that on average, only 18% of clothing bale is profitable. So the economy there is basically that people are receiving bales and they need to pay for it in advance before even opening it. So they take a bale and then they hope for the best and hope that they can make a profit or just get their money back. But with 18% profitable, how do you do that? And so there's a lot of initiatives there that are mending, upcycling, doing the most possible, but there's always inevitably about 50% that will end up as waste and just being discarded like this. So that creates huge open landfills. It clogs waterways, and some people also use it as fuel because it's cheap or on the ground, which creates obviously a lot of health issues in communities. And you can see there's a lot of really good investigations, in particularly in Ghana, Kenya, and also now in Chile. Last year there's been a big kind of loads of articles about a huge open landfill in the middle of the Chilean desert. So I would encourage you to look this up. But yeah, there's a big loophole in the regulations, and all because we don't take responsibility for our waste here, and we just label it all as reusable and let someone else deal with it. So usually when you talk about that, a lot of people will come back to you saying, but we can just recycle, loads of countries recycle the clothes and everything. Where when we talk about textiles, it is a very complicated topic to recycle. There's only 1% of clothes that are recycled or recyclable. Like the capacity is to only take up 1% globally. And when we talk about recycling, it's closed loop, so using a garment to make a new garment. And what you'll hear as recycling will most likely be downcycling. So using clothes to make rags or insulation, so they're shredded and they're kind of losing some of their value, even though that's better than nothing and it's better than being in a landfill, but it is not really keeping in its circulation and keeping the value as much as possible. And that comes back to the idea that also synthetic fibers are really hard to recycle. We don't have the technology as of yet. So mechanical recycling has been existing for decades now, but it can only handle cotton, wool, and make new yarn out of it. Whereas chemical recycling is kind of new, and it's also very energy intensive, water polluting. So there's a lot of issues around there. And all of that just to say that recycling is not really the magical answer for textile or any products in general, but textile in particular. So I guess it's also what do we do from there? Because that's a lot of information. I hope that's not too much right away, but what do we do from there? That's what we're trying to do at Voice. So we advocate for better regulation at the EU and national level. It goes through having clear definitions, so saying what is textile waste and what do we need to deal with here in Ireland and not export. We need a lot of transparency and make sure that the actors in the field and in the sector report on where does the clothes go? Is it effectively being reused? Is it effectively being recycled? And also separate collection, as I was mentioning, coming from the EU, so having this infrastructure in Ireland able to collect the clothes and sort it and prepare it, because there's a whole idea of preparing for reuse as well, you know, sorting properly the clothes. And obviously there's also the idea of making the producers pay for the management of what they create. So the EPR scheme it's called Extended Producer Responsibility, which means any producer that puts a product on the market has to pay a fee in advance to deal with the way when this becomes a waste, if that makes sense. So that is something that we're advocating for as well. But that is kind of like the, you know, the government level, governance level. And at an individual level, there's a lot that can be done as well. And even if we tend not to put all the responsibility on individuals, there's a big, in the fashion sector, I think there's a big shift to be made in terms of culture around fashion, around our clothes, the value that we give them, because we've been pushed in the last 20 years to see items and clothing as disposable. So, all by marketing and everything. So it's kind of like a work to deconstruct that and make a shift in our own minds and in our own practices every day. So it starts with buying less, and buying less will mean that you can afford things that are better made and that will be of better quality for yourself, for the environment, and most likely will help you keep them longer as well, and can be reused. But how, like, where do you start to do that? Because that's a whole journey to kind of start within sustainable fashion. And so I would say the first thing is to inform yourself, like you're doing tonight, and that's a great first step. Learning about fast fashion and understanding the impacts. So, but also learning about what does in like a better choice, what is a better choice? Like, is it to look at the fibers, and is it to look at the brand ethic? All of these things, like inform yourself about what should I look for. And Voice might just be working on a website to do just that and help you kind of navigate this whole industry. So that is a project that I'm working at the moment on, and we'll be launching a website in the end of September. So that's kind of teasing it. But yeah. And then, of course, I think that's something that's not like talked about a lot, but the power of sharing the information and just talking about it with your family, your friends, because sometimes you don't want to bring up like sustainable topics because you're just like, oh, I'm going to be seen as the annoying one. But from experience, I think it actually like can start like really good conversation and interesting ones. It's never about blaming people, but just sharing your own beliefs. And I think if they see that you believe a lot in what you're talking about, that will ignite something in them and be like, oh, okay, I understand more like why she or he so passionate about it. So then there's also starting like little steps to apply the knowledge that you're learning about, because I think sustainable fashion is not just about buying the perfect, organic cotton t-shirt, even if it's great, but it's not the only thing that you can do to be sustainable in fashion. There's a lot to be done around learning new skills, repairing your stuff. Like those are all little things that we're not like taught to do every day. Even like washing a bit less your clothes, that's a great way of being more sustainable. So all of these things are part of sustainable fashion. It's all about, yeah, kind of it's a process, and it's an enjoyable one from my experience. So yeah, I guess that's kind of it. I don't know if I was very quick, or I have no idea of what the time is. But yeah, I guess we can have a little Q&A time if you have anything that wasn't clear or that you'd like me to explore.